Looking into 1 Corinthians chapter 13, probably the most popular chapter in the whole Bible, we see that love is described here. It is explained. And this is the definition of love as God has defined it. Now, love, as we look at its attributes, we see it is really just a revelation or an explanation of God's own character, how God is, his own internal person, his own selflessness, his own humility. And all of these aspects that Paul writes in 1 Corinthians chapter 13 to define love as God defines it have to do with character. And I think it's very interesting and very timely to note that Paul says, even if I have the gift of prophecy, you can literally know every event before it happens. You can look into people's souls and tell them their P.O. box numbers, their dreams, their ambitions, read the deepest secrets of their hearts. And people will come from all over the world to see you, all over the world to be a part of your meetings. But Paul is trying to point out something. Even if I have the gift of prophecy, he says, without love, the internal characteristics of God being dispersed inside of the man by the Spirit, he says, I am nothing. Another one, very interesting. You can know all mysteries. People from all over the world will come to conferences where there's men that have great depth of revelation. And Paul is trying to say here, even if I have the knowledge of all the mysteries that there are, if I do not have the internal characteristics of God being shed abroad in my heart by the Spirit, he says, I am nothing. I don't even register before God. He says, even if I have all faith so as to move mountains. So, think about this. If I went downtown Orlando and by faith, publicly, I moved the SunTrust building, I would become super famous. People would follow me. People would listen to every word that I say because men would be impressed. But God is saying here through 1 Corinthians chapter 13, through the pen of Paul, that even if you had faith to be able to move mountains, split a building in half by speaking through faith, he says even with that, you do not register before God without allowing God's character on the inside. He says, even if I have faith to move mountains, but I don't have God's inward character as explained here through patience and kindness and not being arrogant, enduring all things. If I don't have this, then I am nothing. I still do not register before God. Here's another one. If I give all my possessions to the poor, if I started the Salvation Army, or even started an organization that put the Salvation Army to shame with what it does for the poor, the giving to the needy, even if I was the source of all kinds of actions like this, if I do not have in myself, dispensed by the presence of God and the Spirit of the Lord, which is the same thing, then I am still nothing. You see how God is really putting an emphasis through this chapter on the fact that he wants us to be like him on the inside, not just having the externals of power and gifts, but the internals of character. God's eyes look into the heart of man. See, he judges according to the heart and not according to the outward appearance nor the outward things done. He looks at the inward things. So here's another thing. Even if I give my body to be burned, I can be a martyr, a person who has literally been killed for the gospel, preaching the gospel on the streets, murdered for it, burned at the stake alive. This still has no bearing before God without love, the internal characteristics of God. Anyways, these things recently have been very interesting to me, and I've been feeling them just build up inside of my heart. These things that God desires to see inside of his people, to create a people who he can pour his own self into and live through them, where his own love character can be exemplified through his own people. And I think this is what God is after above all things. So let's look real quickly at what God would deem his own character in a man. This is what God values above all the exploits that men can participate in through faith, knowledge, and revelation. This is the main thing. He says, love is patient, kind. It is not jealous. It does not brag. Man, it is not arrogant. It does not act unbecomingly. It does not seek its own. It is not provoked. It does not take into account a wrong suffered. It does not rejoice in unrighteousness, but rejoices with the truth. It bears all things. Love believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never fails. It has the everlasting quality to it. Love never fails. But if there are gifts of prophecy, they will be done away. If there are tongues, they will cease. If there is knowledge, it will be done away. For we know in part, we prophesy in part, but when the perfect comes, the partial will be done away. The perfect is that age to come, when God comes in and sweeps all things. The only thing that will remain is this kind of characteristic of God inside of man. So therefore these three remain: faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love. God longs to dispense himself into you so that you would look like him. This is godliness. Godliness is when God's character is seen through a man. Godliness is when God's own life comes through a man's life. God bless you.